Hey folks, my name is Robin and welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. Today I want to talk about Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book in my Cosmere reread. One of my main goals for this year is to reread the entire Cosmere before the release of Stormlight 5. And this is actually going to be my first reread of Warbreaker, which is a novel I read for the first time years and years ago at this point, and I didn't have such a good time at that time. I didn't enjoy it as much, but at the same time I was a very different reader at that time. So I was excited to see how I approach this now that frankly I'm more mature as a reader. And I also think quite differently than I used to think back then. And just see what my experience would be like. And honestly, this book taught me the importance of rereading certain books. Because I actually had a blast with it this time around. I was actually able to appreciate it for what it was, what it brings to the table, and in addition to that, it comes at a time when what I expect from fantasy and what I expect from fiction has broadened very significantly from the first time when I read it. So yeah, all of that, I pretty much ended up enjoying it a hell of a lot more than I did the first time. So what is Warbreaker about? Essentially, you have this world where the Empire of Haladren, they rule the world. They rule the known world, effectively, and they're a kingdom on the rise. They overthrew their previous rulers, who fled into the mountains and formed their own kingdom of Idris, and now these two forces, they're on a collision path to war, and one of the only ways to stave this off is for Idris to give a daughter of the royal bloodline to the God King of Haladren, to give his rule that, even though it's been centuries, to give his rule that legitimacy of having a royal heir to the throne, who has that effectively it's a political fantasy at its core, and that's this conflict. These two kingdoms at war, one overthrew the other, one has all the power, one has all the resources, the economic strength and all of that, and the other one is pretty much forced into a do or die position where they have to sacrifice one of their princesses, essentially. The twist comes into the story where the princess that is meant to go as a sacrifice, essentially, to this God King. Her father, the king, he simply couldn't bear to give her up. So instead, he sent his youngest, and it throws a big wrench into everyone's plans because, number one, she is the fourth child. She was never raised with much expectations. In addition to that, because she was the fourth child, and everyone was under the assumption that, okay, it's the first daughter, the eldest daughter that's going to be sent. The focus has always been on her. So when the youngest daughter appears in court, and the treaty really only did specify a daughter, she's a wild card, essentially. And she's a wild card that will drive a spear straight into the heart of this empire, naturally. So there's that's the core of the story. Surrounding that core, there are a few other major storylines that play out, that are meant to just introduce us to deeper parts or other parts of this world. So that story that I just described, that's the story for Ciri, who is one of the princesses of Idris. The sister that was meant to go, Viviana, she sets out on a quest to try and rescue her sister from this fate that was meant to be hers. So that's one of the second plot lines. One of the third plot lines is Lightsong, who is one of the gods of this world, and he wants to unravel the mystery of why he is what he is. And then the final plot line involves this mysterious figure known as Vasha, who his storyline hints at this large and deep conflict and mystery that's going on in the background. So those four, they kind of play out over the course of the novel. I figure most of the people watching this video are familiar with the story. I'm not going to dive into spoilers, but I'm not going to touch too much on that. What did I like about this book? So one of the things that struck me right off the bat, and this is not something I knew, and this is something I know of Sanderson, but it's not something I realized he did so early on. He's just great at puzzling out what are the consequences of actions. Like a lot of the times in fantasy, especially in epic fantasy, like authors they'll include things in their world building, but it lacks a logic to it. For example, in the middle of a build of this in the middle of this long country road, you'll have like this prospering inn. But how is that possible? How is it that this inn always seems to have, and I'm kind of paraphrasing Nicola Griffith on this. She was like, okay, how does this inn always have the best ale, the best food when they're in the middle of nowhere? Like, what was the supply chain like? That kind of thing, right? If you want to know more about that reference that I just made by the way there, check out Raf's channel. He had a really great talk with Nicola Griffith. Absolutely amazing. Check it out. But that's a tangent. Anyway, what I meant to say is, like, Sanderson is really good at puzzling out the logic of this world. If this is the action, what is the consequence? And this is something he did. Like, the Warbreaker is one of his earliest books, and it's something he did to brilliant effect in here. Like, even as I read through and I started trying to puzzle out the consequences myself, I didn't always come to the same conclusion that he did, or I didn't quite envision things the way he did. And I think that's one of his. That's a key skill of his as an author that's made him so successful. It's just his ability to apply logic to a fantasy world. So there's that. Like I mentioned, I just enjoyed this book a lot more on the reread, and it's because, like, I took the time to just immerse myself into the world, just enjoy the story for what it is, which is very much a political thriller, and just enjoy these characters for who they are, what they have to contribute to the story, their personalities and all of that. They're all very different beings. They all have these mysteries before them that they want to unravel and parse, and their personalities they play such a significant way in the way that they approach these mysteries, and they try to puzzle out what's happening around them. Of course, things are never the way they seem, and we do have some pretty interesting revelations as this world goes on. Like, as far as Sanderson climaxes go, this wasn't up there, but it was pretty good. It was satisfying at the very least. One thing that a reread did also, like, I did really benefit from, is just that, like, I was able to appreciate more, like, the Cosmere implications in this book. Like, I could see the foundations of his magic system that goes throughout the entire Cosmere. I could see it within this world as it unfolded. There is one line that struck me, which is where like, Siri was discussing the alphabet on Idris, and one of the characters is Shash, and I distinctly remember that because Shash is also the character that's branded on Kaladin's forehead in Stormlight Archive. So there is certainly a Cosmere connection there. And then, of course, there is the shard that exists or existed in the past in Warbreaker. And one thing I did, like, I know what the shard is, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but one thing I did notice is that society kind of, obviously the magic is, it's inspired by the nature of this shard. But one thing I didn't realize is that also society has kind of structured itself around, in a manner that kind of embodies the nature of the shard. Like, a lot of this story, one of the core things that keeps coming back, that keeps coming up over the course of this novel, is the act of giving. Like, everyone gives of themselves in some way. Like, the gods in this world, one of they're pretty much the only way they can die is to give their life force, essentially, up to a petitioner. So they see petitioners every day. Siri has to give up her life to play such an important role in this new in this new position that she finds herself in, as one of the most powerful people in Haladren. despite absolutely no training for that role. Vivienne gives up her essentially her birthright, her inheritance, whatever, to kind of pursue her sister and try to rescue her from this terrible fate. And of course, there's the magic system, which is all about giving. It's very hierarchical. Like, people essentially give their, as think of it as their life force. They give their life force to strengthen others, and the more you got it, the more powerful you are. That kind of thing. So, like, giving is at the heart of it, and that ties in with the nature of the shard. Yeah, so that was a cool observation, and I suspect as I read through as I continue to read through the Cosmere novels, I will find that also happen elsewhere. Like, the society has kind of consciously or unconsciously molded itself around the nature of this shard. But there's that. You don't need to know any of that stuff to enjoy this book. Like, it is very much a political thriller. You can read it as it is. There are some threads left open at the end that we know there are going to be sequels to Warbreaker. Should be interesting to see. And yeah, like I said, I enjoyed this much more on my second read. This was my second read, mainly because I'm a very different person, and I'm much more capable of accepting and appreciating books for what they are, and not necessarily what I want from them. So, and I'm also the type of reader now who's matured to the point where I appreciate variety in my stories. I want to see creativity. I want to see uniqueness, even though I read strictly within a particular genre, but not strictly, or I read primarily within a particular genre. I'm much more willing in terms of the scope of that, and it's a book that found me at the right time, so I enjoyed it way more than I did the first time I read it. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about Warbreaker. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching. I'll be slowly reading and talking about literally every Cosmere book that's been released, leading right up into Stormlight 5. So if you're interested in that stuff, or if you're tired of it, expect it anyway. If you made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.